Right now, while automakers around the world are racing to build bigger SUVs and more powerful electric vehicles, one Japanese company has gone in the exact opposite direction. This is the Midget X, a vehicle so small that many people thought it was nothing more than a concept car displayed to attract attention at the Japan Mobility Show. But Daihatsu believes this tiny machine could solve a problem that America has been struggling with for decades. So why would one of Japan's oldest car makers build something that looks less like the future and more like a toy? The answer begins with a simple question. What if we've been thinking about cars the wrong way all along? Most people have exactly the same first reaction when they see the Midget X. That's not a real car. And honestly, it's easy to understand why. Compared with today's SUVs, pickups, and electric crossovers, the Midget X looks unbelievably small. It has a single main driver's seat, a compact cargo area, exposed wheels, and a playful design that feels more like a futuristic city pod than a conventional automobile. Park it next to almost any modern vehicle, and it almost disappears. For many visitors at the Japan Mobility Show, the conclusion seemed obvious. Daihatsu had simply built another futuristic concept to generate headlines before quietly moving on to its next project. The surprising part is that the Midget X didn't appear out of nowhere. In fact, it follows an idea that Daihatsu has been refining for generations. Long before this futuristic concept appeared, the company introduced the original Daihatsu Midget, a compact utility vehicle that became one of Japan's most recognizable work vehicles during the country's post-war recovery. It wasn't built to impress people. It was built because Japan needed something small enough to move efficiently through narrow streets, crowded neighborhoods, and busy local businesses where larger vehicles simply weren't practical. The Midget became a symbol of efficiency, proving that usefulness wasn't determined by size. Decades later, the Midget X brings that same philosophy into a new era. The design may look futuristic, but the thinking behind it is deeply rooted in Japan's automotive history. That's what makes the Midget X so interesting. The real surprise isn't that Daihatsu built an extremely small vehicle. The real surprise is that they never intended to build a smaller version of a normal car. Instead, they started with a completely different question. What does a vehicle actually spend most of its life doing? The moment you ask that question, the Midget X stops looking like a toy. It starts looking like a vehicle designed for a very specific purpose. And that purpose may be far more relevant than most people realize. But that creates an even bigger mystery. If the Midget X was designed around everyday travel, why does it only have one main seat when almost every other car in the world is built for 4 or 5? At first, a single-seat vehicle sounds like a terrible idea. Cars are supposed to carry families, friends, children, groceries, luggage. That's exactly how most of us have been taught to think about transportation. If a car only works for one person, then surely it's making a compromise somewhere. Why spend thousands of dollars on a vehicle that appears to do less than every other car on the market? From that perspective, the Midget X almost feels incomplete, not because it lacks technology, but because it seems to ignore one of the oldest rules in automotive design. A car should always be ready to carry more people than you actually need. But that assumption begins to fall apart when you stop looking at the car and start looking at the journey. Think about your own daily routine: driving to work, picking up coffee, going to the supermarket, running errands. How many of those trips actually require 4 or 5 seats? For millions of commuters around the world, the answer is surprisingly simple. Most daily journeys involve just one person. Japan recognized that pattern decades ago. Instead of designing every vehicle around the busiest day of the year, Japanese automakers began asking a different question: what vehicle makes the most sense for the average day instead? That philosophy gave birth to an entire category of compact urban vehicles. Models like the Honda N-Box became bestsellers not because they were luxurious or powerful, but because they perfectly matched the way millions of people actually travel every day. The Midget X simply pushes that same philosophy one step further. Suddenly, the single seat no longer feels like something that has been removed. It feels like something that was never needed in the first place. The Midget X wasn't designed by asking, how many seats can we fit? It was designed by asking, how many seats are actually being used? Those two questions produce completely different vehicles. and they reveal a completely different way of thinking about transportation. But if designing for everyday trips makes so much sense, why didn't America, the world's largest car market, build a vehicle like this first? For many people, the answer seems obvious. America builds large vehicles because Americans simply love large vehicles. Look around almost any American city, and it's easy to see why people think that. Full-size pickups dominate the roads. Large SUVs fill shopping center parking lots. Even family cars have grown dramatically larger over the past 2 decades. Compared with the Midget X, vehicles like the Ford F-150 or the Cadillac Escalade almost look like they belong to a completely different world. So the conclusion appears simple. Japan likes small cars, America likes big ones. End of story. But reality is far more complicated. The biggest difference isn't what people want, it's the environment those vehicles were designed for. Much of America's transportation system was built around wide highways, long commuting distances, suburban neighborhoods, and large parking spaces. A vehicle often needs to cover dozens of miles before reaching its destination. It may carry work equipment during the week, tow a trailer on weekends, or take an entire family on long road trips. Designing larger vehicles makes sense under those conditions. Japan faced a completely different reality. Its cities grew around narrow streets, limited parking, dense neighborhoods, and shorter daily journeys. Instead of asking, how can one vehicle handle every situation? Japanese engineers increasingly asked, what vehicle fits the journey people make most often? The difference wasn't culture, it was design philosophy. That's why the Midget X shouldn't be compared with an F-150. They were never created to solve the same problem. Suddenly, the conversation changes. This isn't Japan versus America. It isn't small cars versus big cars. It's 2 completely different ways of defining what a successful vehicle should be. One philosophy prepares for the biggest possible day. The other optimizes for the most common day. Neither approach is automatically right or wrong, but they produce vehicles that look completely different. And that's exactly why the Midget X seems so strange to American eyes. It wasn't designed for America's biggest journeys. It was designed for life's smallest ones. But if vehicles like the Midget X make sense for everyday travel, why are more countries outside Japan beginning to build tiny cars that follow the same idea? If the Midget X makes sense, then surely it's only because Japan is different. Its streets are narrower, its cities are denser, its parking spaces are smaller, so perhaps this tiny vehicle could only exist in Japan. After all, what works in Tokyo shouldn't work in Los Angeles. What works in Osaka shouldn't work in Dallas. That sounds reasonable. But something unexpected has been happening over the last few years. Vehicles inspired by the same philosophy have quietly started appearing far beyond Japan. Across Europe, compact electric vehicles like the Citroën Ami have found a growing audience among city drivers who rarely travel long distances. Toyota introduced the C+ Pod, another ultra-compact electric vehicle designed for short urban trips rather than long highway journeys. These vehicles don't compete with family SUVs. They don't try to replace pickup trucks. Instead, they focus on one simple question. What is the smallest vehicle that can comfortably complete the journey most people make every day? The more cities struggle with congestion, limited parking, rising fuel costs, and an aging population, the more that question begins to matter. Suddenly, the Midget X no longer looks like an isolated Japanese experiment. It looks like one answer to a problem many countries are only beginning to face. Perhaps the future isn't about replacing every large vehicle. Perhaps it's about stopping the habit of using large vehicles for small jobs. That's a completely different idea. The Midget X doesn't ask drivers to give up their SUV. It simply asks whether every trip really needs one. For millions of short journeys every single day, the answer may already be no. At the beginning of this video, the Midget X looked like a toy. Then it became a practical city vehicle. Now it represents something much bigger. Not a new type of car, but a new way of thinking about transportation. Maybe Japan didn't build the car America needs. Maybe Japan built the car that reminds us to ask a question we've ignored for decades. Are we designing cars for the journeys we actually make, or for the journeys we only imagine? The Midget X was never trying to become the biggest car on the road. It never needed to, because its goal was never to do everything. Its goal was to do the one thing most people do every day: move one person efficiently from one place to another. And perhaps that's why this tiny vehicle doesn't just challenge the future of cars. It challenges the way we've been thinking about them all along.